Her name is Anusha, and she went to school with me, worked at Apple as an engineer, and is now going to be going to grad school at Stanford in the fall. So we're going to kind of just have an informal chat, talk about kind of how she got to, how she decided which school she was going to go to, how she decided what she was going to major in school, kinds of research opportunities, and how you decided to go to grad school. Cool. Yeah, so we talk a lot kind of here about the importance of going straight into industry and stuff like that, but I think it's also really important to hear from someone who's taken a different path and really sees value in going to not just finish college, but go to, back to school for graduate school. So kind of starting off at the beginning of your path, how did you decide what school you wanted to go to?
Hello. Okay. It was actually really easy for me because I only got into one school, and I went to it. But I think when applying, a lot of the factors that I had in mind were which schools had like the best opportunities for me, and at the time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kind of just wanted to go somewhere where I could learn anything and everything that I wanted to learn. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. But then looking back at that decision, I also realized that it wasn't a very important decision. So I think that's something to always keep in perspective, is that where you go to college, ultimately, it makes a little bit of a difference, but it's more what you do there and what you gain from it that's more important.
Cool. Is everyone here? I think we have to put the microphones up to our mouth more.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Great. Okay. And then how did you decide, once you started college, did you always know what you wanted to study? Did you take some time to figure that out? What was the major choosing process like?
Yeah, I think I went through a lot of soul searching and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to do neuroscience, and I also wanted to do linguistics, and I also wanted to do writing, and also computer science. So it was kind of all over the place. So I think a lot of people go through that, and the best thing for me was to just talk to people a lot, take a lot of classes, kind of see what appealed to me the most. And then also to keep in mind that no matter what I did, I could still take classes in other areas and learn about other areas. So that was really useful. I had a lot of friends who were doing other things, so I never felt like I was not learning about something that I wanted to be learning about. But ultimately, I think choosing computer science for me was just because I loved coding so much, and I loved my classes so much, and so it was ultimately it was an easy decision, but in the beginning there was a lot of soul searching.
Had you coded at all before you went to college?
Yeah, so I went to this semi-intense high school in Dubai, which was an Indian high school, so we had to code from basically grade 7 or 8. So so I had coded a lot before, and I knew I really liked it, but it wasn't until I got to college that I was like, okay, this is something that I'm really passionate about. This is something I love doing. So.
Cool. Okay. And then while you were in college, what were the most important things that you feel like you got out of college? Was it the classes? Was it the people? Was it kind of just being in a different place and kind of being on your own for the first time? Was it specific skills that you learned when you were in school?
I think a bit of all of those things. So college for me was the first time that I was really, really by myself and taking control of my own life. So that was a really important stepping stone for me to kind of figuring myself out, and that was really good. And also, I think one of the most important things I took away with people like you, Samara, it was I think I made a lot of really great friends, and the thing about making good friends in college is that they really help you get through it, but you also have a lot of people to share your experiences with, and I think that was really good for me, just to meet other people who were doing things similar to me, but not exactly the same. So I always had different perspectives. I always had different people to talk to about where I was going in life. And I think also my classes were really great, but I think I got a lot of knowledge from college. That I got a lot of knowledge out of it that wasn't necessarily just from classes. It was from going to random seminars, random lectures, just from being in New York, going to events around the city, all of that. So I think I gained a lot out of it, but I think that everyone makes their own personal experience, so that was mine.
Yeah, so just for context, we both went to Columbia, which is in New York City, in Manhattan. And right, yeah, I think that one of the things that people always kind of talk about is, well, college is great for finding people, right? So even if you're someone who's like, I definitely know that I want to start a company, but you know that you still want to go to college, finding a co-founder is probably never easier than in college because you're all kind of in the same area physically, which is incredibly important, and you get to see how people work in groups, which is one of the most important things to choosing somebody that you want to work with for like minimum 8-10 years of your life. Cool. And then, what was kind of? Did you always know what you wanted to do after? After college? Can you kind of talk about like what did you do any internships while you were there? What was that kind of like in terms of deciding what you wanted to do after?
Yeah. So when at the end of my sophomore year, during that summer, I got to intern at Apple, and that was kind of like my first real world internship experience. So it was really, really great, and I kind of got a sense that I liked doing engineering. I liked being out there in the real world, applying what I've learned.
What was the interview process like?
It was like kind of more intense than I'd expected, but less intense than than it is now. So, because this was like 3 years ago. But I just had I had a bunch of like coding questions. Different people interviewed me, like 4 or 5 different people. My manager interviewed me like 3 times. But most of it was like between. I was still a sophomore, so a lot of it was like kind of focusing on like behavioral stuff and whether I would be a good fit for the team because I was so young that I wasn't very specialized or anything like that. So I was kind of learning. They were kind of asking me about just like basic Java and like other basic like coding questions and stuff like that. And it was a good interview process. Like I think it gave me like a good idea of what the interview process is generally like. So that was really, really good for me. And kind of working at Apple, I figured that I really liked the team, I really liked being there, I really liked the product. I worked on Siri, so I really liked the product, and that was a good experience for me. So then when I went on to like look for full-time jobs and things like that, I was kind of deciding between getting a full-time job and going back to grad school. So then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna apply to Apple and see how it goes. And luckily I got a position back on the same team. So it was really great. I got to go back and do that full time. So yeah, that was kind of my thought process there. I was like, I really like this. I kind of want to do it some more. So let's see how that goes.
What were the other companies that you applied to work at for internships and then for full time?
I applied to a couple of startups. One called Medallia, one called Expect Labs, doing very niche things that in the area that I like, which is machine learning and natural language processing. And I also applied to Apple. I also applied to Facebook. Honestly, I didn't apply to too many companies, and I think different people find that different things work for them, but I didn't like interviewing at too many places, or just like, I didn't like the stress of having like interview after interview after interview.
Yeah, I remember that. That winter was crazy for all of us.
Yeah, I really hated that, but I think I know a lot of people who applied to like 15 different places, 20 different places, like really taking their time with it, but I'm kind of a rushed person. And I like things to be really quick. So I applied to 4 companies and I was like, all right, if I get one of these, I'll take it. If not, then I'll find some more places that I like. So that was kind of my thought process.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what you, can you talk about what your internship project was at Apple, or is that still a secret?
No, that's not a secret. It's, so like I said, I worked on Siri. So my problem was actually something kind of fun, which is if someone says like, can I think of a good example? Okay, so if someone says like, what is Mars? How do you know as like a system whether they're talking about Mars the planet or Mars the chocolate, for example? So that was like a really interesting problem, but it was something that hadn't been solved. So I was kind of getting to do something that was new for Siri, and that was really, really good. I got to apply a lot of cool techniques that I learned about. I also learned a lot that I'd never heard about before. And I did a lot of engineering, and it was just like, yeah, it was a really overwhelming but fun experience. So yeah, it's not a secret though. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Any more about kind of the day-to-day life as an intern at Apple? Were there crazy perks that you wanted to talk about, or?
There are crazy perks. You get like a 15% discount off Apple products, which is pretty neat. But I think day-to-day as an engineer, one of the things that I noticed was that, at least at Apple, like people really like to work really hard, and that's something that varies from company to company, but I actually saw people voluntarily stay up till like 11 or 12 replying to emails, like working on things, like submitting code, and that was really, really interesting for me because when you're in college, like all you ever hear from people is like, oh man, I'm so sleep deprived, like I just want to sleep, I don't want to do this homework, but like going to work and seeing people who are like so passionate about what they were doing, and that really motivated me, and I think that was like the first time that I was like, wow, this is like people actually love working here, and I know that it's like that at a lot of different companies. People voluntarily put themselves through like 12-hour workdays, and especially so at startups, like people really, really love what they're doing, and when it's your own company, it's like, okay, I really have to work hard at this. So that was really interesting, and also one of the things I really liked was there were a lot of people from like different backgrounds and different levels of expertise. So there were some people who had been at Apple for like 15 years and they had switched around from team to team to team and eventually found themselves at Siri. There were some people who had just joined like 6 months before me, but they had like a PhD, for example. So they were so much more specialized than I was. And I found that really interesting because depending on what I was dealing with, I could talk to different people, get different perspectives. So if I was having a really hard time with like a particular engineering problem, I could talk to someone who had been an engineer for like 20 years and I could get their perspective on it. But if I was having trouble with like something really, really technical about machine learning, I could talk to one of the PhD students and like figure that out. So I think that was like really, really good to be around so many people who were actively not just trying to do their work, but also actively trying to help other people out.
Cool. So then how did you make the decision after all that to go back and get your master's in computer science?
So that was actually something that was always on my mind, and I think this is also something that differs from person to person. But for me, during my undergrad, like I said, I did a lot of soul searching, and I switched majors a lot, I switched classes a lot. So by the time I got out of it, I knew I really loved computer science, but I always had this feeling that maybe I could be taking more classes, maybe I could be learning more. And grad school is not necessarily the only way to do that. It's actually not at all the only way to do that. There are a ton of different ways that you could do it, but for me, I love being in classes. Like I love being talked at, in a sense. Like I love lectures. As much as I know this sounds weird, I like doing projects and homework. So it was kind of like an easy decision for me to be like, all right, I'm gonna go back to school and I'm gonna take more classes and also kind of figure out what area of computer science I really like, because during undergrad, because I'd spent so much time figuring out that I wanted to do computer science, I kind of...
What were the other majors that you had before that?
I did neuroscience, I did psychology, I did linguistics.
And you actually declared those, or that's just like...
I didn't declare them, but like I would go to my advisor like every semester and be like, okay, so now I think I want to do neuroscience. And she was like, don't tell me about this, like just figure it out. But I think by the time I got out of college, I'd like spent so much time figuring out computer science that I'd only done like one specialization in computer science. So I kind of thought grad school would be a great place to go and like figure out other areas of computer science that I liked, take more classes that I'd really missed out on, things like that, and just in general also make more connections, meet more people. Grad school is a really great way to do that too. So.
Cool. So if I'm a student in college right now and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do after college, how could I figure out if graduate school would be right for me? What are some of the things I could do while I'm still in college to figure that out?
So that's a hard question, but I think one of the things to really think about is, so if you're talking about like a PhD, I think most people know that they want to do a PhD, so I'm just going to assume that that's not really as hard of a question. But if you want to figure out whether you want to do a PhD, I think the best way to do it is to kind of try and get involved in research at college and see whether you like being in a research environment, whether you like the idea of working on a single problem for 5 years of your life, 3 to 5 years, optimistically. But whether you like that idea, and that really appeals to some people. But if you're trying to figure out whether you want to do a master's or whether you want to go work full time, I would say the best thing to do is to kind of try and do internships and figure out whether being in an engineering environment is something that you immediately want for yourself. And the other thing is, depending on where you want to work, having a master's may or may not be necessary. So for me, like the other thing I forgot to mention at Apple was that everyone around me had like a master's or a PhD. I was the only person who was like straight out of college. even when I was full time. So I think for me, I really felt like to be in an environment like that, I needed more specialized understanding of the area that I'm interested in. So that's personally why I decided to go to grad school. But if you're more interested in getting like a broad engineering experience, then maybe you don't need to go to grad school. And that's something you can try and figure out during your thought process is like, do I want to take more classes? Are there areas that I feel like I'm really missing out on? Can I take those classes online? Do I even have to go back to grad school for it? Do I like engineering more than I like studying? All of those kinds of questions are kind of easier to deal with if you just expose yourself to all the different paths in front of you and consider all of them.
So yeah, just to clarify, so she did multiple internships at Apple, then graduated early, and then worked at Apple for 6 months, and is now going back to grad school. So that was the 6 months that she spent full time at Apple. Cool. Okay, and then what are you going to do after grad school?
I have no idea. So that's kind of the big abyss that I'm not going to deal with. But I think from my experience in industry, I really liked it. And I think I do want to go back, but possibly to a smaller company, just because I want to get that's an experience I've never had. So that would be really good. I don't think I'm considering academia as of now, but probably going back to industry is my best shot. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, all right. I think now is a good time to take questions. So any questions? Yeah, can we get a mic? Any questions that you would like to ask about grad school, about internships, about interview processes? Yeah.
As an undergrad doing an internship, during the interview process, were you expected to have more depth of knowledge in like a single language or a single area, or were you expected to have more of like a shallow knowledge of various concepts?
I think the expectations vary a lot based on the company, the position, the people actually interviewing you. But I found that for most of my interviews, people just expected me to be able to write code and to have like a general knowledge of a lot of different areas. I think most interviews tend to be like, can you solve this particular problem well using code? And for that, you don't really need to have like a specialized knowledge in one particular area. So I think, yeah, for when I interviewed in junior year and for full time, I was interviewing for more specialized roles. So I did get a lot more like specific questions. But I think typically if you're just applying for like a general engineering internship role, your questions are going to be very general, not very specific, unless you indicate that you have a very specific interest in an area. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Other questions?
Hi, so as an undergrad who's thinking about going back for a master's, how would you say that grad school differs from your undergrad?
I think one of the ways that it one of the ways that I've been told that it's different
Yeah,
is
having not started yet.
one of the ways that I've been told that it's different is that you actually get to spend more time on your classes. I think because undergrad is supposed to be a time of like not just taking classes, but also getting to know people, getting like the full college experience. And I hope I got that out of college, but I think grad school is supposed to be more a time where you like really get into what you're studying, and you just essentially get more specialized than you would at an undergrad level. So I think that's going to be like the major difference for me is like focusing more on what I'm learning in my classes. That's going to be really different.
Yeah, for both of us at Columbia, it was weird because there were so many grad students in our classes to begin with that we were essentially taking all the same classes, and the only thing that was different was, they had way more time to spend on the classes.
Yeah, they had so much more time, yeah.
Other questions? No? How did you decide which grad school you wanted to go to?
I really got lazy.
She got lazy and went to Stanford.
I had applied for grad schools, but by the time I heard back from any of them, I was already here working. So when I got into Stanford, I was like, all right, I'm not moving. Like I'm gonna be like 10 miles away. That was my decision process. Yeah.
So as a person who enjoys computer science but also has interest in other areas, what advice would you have for somebody like myself who has interests in those other areas?
I think one of the things that I would definitely say is try and if you know that computer science is something that you absolutely want to do, you can try and kind of find ways to apply it to those other areas, which is kind of what I did with linguistics. Like I really love linguistics, but I knew I wanted to do computer science, so I was really lucky and I found natural language processing. But if that's just not possible, if that intersection is not possible, and it is for some areas, then the best thing you can do is kind of if you're trying to figure out also whether that might be like a possible career for you, the best thing to do is take as many classes, talk to as many people as possible who've gone down both paths, and figure out what appeals to you more. And if for example, you like music or something like that, figure out whether that appeals to you more. Talk to people who've done it, take classes in it if possible, and just in general, I think having more information is better than having less information. So the more information you can get about all your different possibilities, the more informed you'll be when you make that decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like we have a lot of friends who have interest in more than just computer science and have gone on to do some really interesting applications. In bio, in English, even history has like a lot of.
I think the cool thing about computer science now is that like everyone likes it so much that everyone is just like dying to kind of apply it anywhere and everywhere. So honestly, if you have an interest and you like computer science, you'll probably find a way to apply computer science to that. But yeah.
Yeah, and if it's not currently a field, then there's a perfect opportunity for a startup that hasn't been created yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right over here.
Yeah.
Over here. How can I know that my knowledge is enough in CS to apply for an internship in a top company?
I think so. The way to prepare for internships and interviews and stuff is really you don't need to have a lot of prior knowledge. And I'm saying this from a place of I didn't know anything when I was a sophomore and I did my interviews. I was in this place where I was like, I know Java and that's all I know. So I think if you're really, really motivated and you really want to do an internship, there are a lot of resources that can help you prepare for interviews. And I think if you're a college student and assuming you get through your interviews and you get that internship, people don't expect you to know anything. And that's really the secret. Like if you're in college, people don't expect you to know anything at your internship. And it's really great because it takes a lot of pressure off of you. And really the only thing you need to prepare for are your interviews. Because the interviews are where they really want to figure out whether you can code. And mostly what that comes down to is can you think logically and can you think like a computer scientist? Can you think like an engineer? And there are a couple of books on preparing for interviews called Cracking the Coding Interview.
Programming Interviews Exposed.
Yeah, Programming Interviews Exposed. And those will pretty much brush you up on everything you need to know. And then after that, when you go into your internship, people are so understanding. And as long as you're willing to learn, you'll be able to do a great job. So the short answer is your knowledge is always going to be enough as long as you're motivated enough. Yeah.
What do you think about the current education system?
The what?
Current education system, what do you think about it? Like, make school is probably better than a college degree. They
Sorry,
teach you
what
so
is
much.
probably better?
Make school, they teach you so much.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, so when I was deciding when I was going to go to college, it seemed like there was no option. And I think a lot of people still think that way. It's like, if you don't go to college, what are you going to do, right? But if you have opportunities like this, if you're motivated enough to teach yourself, and if you're motivated enough to actually come to places like Make School and go to other courses where you can learn and you can be like a self-learner, then I don't think that going to college is as important, or at least going to college for computer science, I don't think it's as important as just kind of being motivated enough to want to do all these things yourself. So if you're if you are passionate enough about it and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go to Make School, and I'm gonna learn iOS development, and then I'm gonna make an app, then you're set. I don't think going to college is a bad thing, but I also don't think it's necessary, like absolutely necessary. Yeah.
Yeah. There are a lot of experiences that you can't necessarily get as easily other than in college. So if you look at where you want to be and then you you look at the people who are there and see if they have college degrees or not. Like that seems like what you kind of were talking about when you were at Apple. You looked around and you saw that everyone had master's degrees, and it seemed like that was kind of what you had to do in order to be able to get to the next level. But if you look at where you want to be, and that's not the case for where you want to be, then obviously college and those requirements aren't as necessary.
And I think also, in general, yeah, like Samara is absolutely right. The only reason that going to college is probably so important is because a lot of things are harder if you don't. And that's why I keep saying you have to be motivated enough, because like if you're not motivated enough to give yourself like still a semi-structured education, then you're gonna have a really, really hard time. So I think the most important thing is if you can teach yourself, if you can bring yourself up to that same level of knowledge as anyone else who goes to college, then you're totally and absolutely set, and then it doesn't matter.
I have two questions. The first is, do you have any information about the next iPhone?
No, I'm so sorry.
It's worth a shot. And the second one is there any reason you chose to apply and work for Apple over, say, like Google? Like, was it the work environment or?
I think so. So I think the reason that I chose to apply to Apple versus Google was just that I had already worked at Apple before, and I had a very, very clear sense of what team I wanted to apply to and exactly what I wanted to do. The thing about applying to Google is, and Samara can probably say more about this because she's a badass, but the thing about applying to Google is when you apply, the interview process is very, very general. And you don't really get a say on what team you're going to. You just you throw yourself into the pool, and then you kind of just figure out later on which team you're going to. But at Apple, I could really say, okay, this is the team that I'm going to be on. Like I applied directly to Siri. I didn't apply through like a general engineering thing, and that was because I was like so interested in that. That was like the reason that I made that decision. But if I had been, I think, yeah, if I had been more open, if I was more open to like a lot of different teams, I would have definitely also applied to Google.
In your career like search, when you were looking for internships, did you apply online or like go to the career fair at Columbia or like special networking sessions in order to like get your internship at Apple?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are so many ways to do it now. I almost wish it was easier, but online applications are definitely a great way to kind of first off see what companies you're interested in, see what positions they have you might be interested in. But I think most of my successful applications have always been the result of me like directly reaching out to a recruiter or, for example, like meeting a recruiter at a career fair. And it's kind of sad that that's the case, but it's mostly just because there are so many applicants that it's really, really hard for recruiters to kind of reach out to individual people. So I always think it's, if you know someone who knows a recruiter, always try and do that because it can't hurt. It can't hurt to have a recruiter know that you exist. But obviously, if an online application is your only way to go, if you have no connections to a company, that's fine. And I have gotten offers from companies where that was the case. But it's always better to try and make as many connections as possible and just use them to your advantage. Because if you can directly make a connection with a recruiter either on LinkedIn or through a career fair, if they even remember your face,
or through a current engineer, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or through a current engineer. Yeah, if you can get a referral, that's great. That's like a really, really great way to get yourself in.
Factors helped you get into a good school like Stanford? Was it just industry experience that you got, or was there some research experience that you did during undergrad?
Thanks, that's a compliment. I honestly, I don't know, and I know that's a really frustrating answer, but I really don't know. I had a terrible GPA, so it definitely wasn't that one. But I think one of the things that I liked about my application, and that if I was someone reviewing my application, I would be like, okay, that's pretty cute. is that I took like an effort to make my statement of purpose, which is like kind of like a college essay. I took an effort to really make that about my passion and about what I wanted to do at Stanford. And I think I don't know if that's what they were looking for. I don't know if they were just looking at my recommendations and being like, oh yeah, she's cool. It could be that. I honestly don't know, but I think that one of the most useful things to do is when you apply to schools, kind of figure out why you would be a good fit for that school, why that school would be a good fit for you. And if that equation like looks good, and you can reflect that in your statement of purpose, then I think you have a really good chance of getting in.
And you asked about research, right? That you did. What kind of research did you do in college?
So I did, when I was a sophomore, I reached out to a professor who was really, really nice to even respond to me. And I did research with her for the next 3 years. And it was a really, really good experience because I started out not knowing anything at all. And she just gave me a chance to work on like basic like Python code. And that was really cool. But then by the end of it, I knew a lot about her field. I knew a lot about the area. I'd interacted with a few of her PhD students. And I think, if you like doing research, I think I would definitely recommend trying to get a research experience out of college or out of grad school or anywhere because I think I enjoyed doing research a lot. I don't know if it helped with my application, but I know that it helped me a lot because I learned so much from it. And it's kind of like doing an internship, but you're doing it in an academic setting and you're not an engineer. So it's not at all like doing an internship, but but it's still a really, really good experience and a good way to get a lot of knowledge. Yeah.
Any other? Yeah.
So, if you could give yourself advice before going to college, what would it be?
Oh yeah. I would probably tell myself that I would probably teach myself about opportunity cost, because I think that I think all of us have this like small tendency to be like, like if an opportunity is sitting in front of us, to be like, yeah, you know what, like I could always do that like next year, I could always do that next month or something like that. But I think like as you go through college, like as I went through college, I saw people taking those opportunities that I was not taking. And I was just like, okay, so I should have done that, but I didn't. And, obviously, like, I don't think that, but personally, like, I'm not unhappy with myself. But I think that there are always opportunities that you can, that you would probably pass on, but you shouldn't. And I think that's something that's really important to consider because it's really easy to think, oh, I'm so young, it doesn't matter, I can do this later. And I still think that, but it's important to recognize that sometimes you might not get that opportunity back, or when it comes back, it might be too late. You might have different priorities, and in general, I would also tell myself that more knowledge is always better. I think when I was younger, I had this tendency to kind of be like, no, I'm only interested in computer science, so I'm not going to try and learn like as much about other areas, or like, oh, I'm only interested in neuroscience, I'm not going to try and do other areas, but that's something that it's a really easy trap to fall into, but I would like really encourage younger me to not do that because I think it's so important to try and learn as much as you can while you're young. Because honestly, like working 6 months, I was like, wow, I don't have time to do anything other than work, and it's so hard to try and broaden your horizons while you're not while you're an adult, while you're working, maybe even when you're in grad school. So when you're in college, when you're younger than that, it's so important to just try and learn as much as you can about everything. So when you're old, you can just be like, whatever, now I can work. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Any other last questions?
So I'm wondering, in grad school, it's mostly focused on research, and a lot of that focus is on publishing. But at a company that has an R&D department, particularly something large like Apple, the research is more focused on getting things out there. But I'm wondering about what are the resources you have access to, or the opportunities that at a university that you don't have at a company, and vice versa. Like, what do you have at a company, whether it be really large like Apple or a startup, that you just wouldn't have access to at a university for research specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. When you're at Apple, one of the resources or one of the things you can't do is you can't talk about what you're doing. So you can't actually publish. But one of the things that you don't get more often than not in an academic setting is like the feeling of creating a product. I think academia is more about like how do we solve this problem, but it's never about how do we solve it in the fastest way possible in a product that scales that people can use. And I think research at a large company is more often than not just about like how can we make this better, but how can we make it better and usable by like millions of people and fast enough that everyone can use it at the same time. So those are kind of different experiences, and I think they're very, very related because if you don't have academic research, you can't apply those things to corporate environments, and vice versa. But I think they're kind of different experiences, but they're both really important because you learn a lot when you're creating a product that you don't when you're doing research, and the other way around. So,
All right. Any last question, or we all good? Great. Okay, let's thank the speaker.